Welcome to the ELP Revolutionized Leadership webinar. This is a webinar for Teen Challenge leaders and leaders of any community. We're so glad that you have been able to join us for today's webinar, whether you're joining us live or on a recorded webinar. Let me just remind us of why we're here today. The intent of the Emerging Leaders Program is to raise up the next generation of Teen Challenge leaders who will carry on our God-given mission and be infused with the DNA of Teen Challenge. And as leaders, you guys are the key to this process. So our goal is to support you and give you the tools so that you can grow in your effectiveness as leaders. So I'm here with Rick Castro. Rick Castro is a Teen Challenge leader at Teen Challenge of Arizona. He has been with Teen Challenge for 15 years. He entered the program in 1999, and following graduation, he began his ministry at the Christian Life Ranch, the very center that dramatically impacted his life. Rick served in various positions at the ranch and was eventually asked to take on the role of center director. Rick and his wife Marie have been directing the Christian Life Ranch since 2004, and they have two children, 23-year-old Ashley and 6-year-old Daniel. In 2008, graduated from Western Bible College and Assemblies of God School in Phoenix, Arizona. And currently, Rick is enrolled in the Emerging Leaders Program through the Teen Challenge Southeast. He's actually enrolled in the Level 3 right now, the Level 3 program right now. With completion of Level 3 in sight, he'll be graduating in October. Rick will be graduating this year. Rick has a tremendous passion for discipleship and to see Teen Challenge raise sons and daughters in these last days. Under his leadership, men have been trained to take on leadership roles at other Teen Challenge centers and other local ministries as well. So we want to thank you so much, Rick, for joining us. And at this time, I'm going to turn over the presentation to you, and you can take us through this topic of connecting with the heart, raising up sons and daughters. So I'm going to turn over the presentation to you right now. Jeremy, could you also mute your speaker as well? Thank you.
Yes. Okay.
Can you hear us okay?
Good morning,
Yes.
everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, good. I'm going to share with you this morning a little bit about our journey here in Arizona, how we got to where we're at today. And we kind of moved away from a write-up system, more a ticket, demerit kind of system that typically Teen Challenge had used over the years, and we've been moving towards more of a grace-based environment. And one of the things that we found in this journey that when we started this whole thing is that one of the problems that we kept experiencing over and over again was the students would go through the program and do great, and they'd follow the rules, they'd do all the right things, and then graduate Teen Challenge in this within a few short months, sometimes weeks, we'd find they go back to using drugs. And so we started really asking the question, what are we doing wrong, or what can we do better to capture the hearts? Because we found that guys were really good at doing program, but not so good at doing relationships. And so we started to move into learning of what it looks like to raise a son or a daughter versus what it takes to raise, get somebody through a program. And hopefully you guys can see this, but one of the things the Lord really showed me is that, how does God look at us? Does he look at us through the law, or does he look at us through what Jesus Christ accomplished? Of course, we all know that he looks at us through what Jesus accomplished. John chapter 1, verse 17 says that the law came by Moses, but truth and grace were realized through Jesus Christ. And so we have this picture that we're supposed to realize our relationship with Jesus and ultimately with the Lord through what he accomplished on the cross. And so we begin to really think, we need to learn how to see people the way God sees them. And so, like, if you're looking at this picture on a screen, it just looks like a bunch of junk. But we need to learn how to see people through the grace of God. And so when you're looking at this image, it just looks like trash. But when you get to the right angle, the right viewpoint, you get to see that there's an actual piece of a work of art, And I come to realize that many times in Teen Challenge, we look, our ability to spot sin and our ability to find out what's going on with people is spot on. But normally, our ability to deal with what's going on with them, not so much. And then maybe your experience with Teen Challenge maybe something like this. I know it was for us. It just seemed like we were always trying to control behavior of, misbehaving students. And so we were constantly in this cops and robbers mentality trying to find out, what we're always trying to catch somebody doing something wrong. And that may not be where you guys were at, but that was definitely where we were at. And so when I took over as the director, interim director in 2004, I really started to seek the Lord and ask him, what is it that we're doing wrong? How can a guy go through the program and do stellar in the program and then, fail sometime shortly thereafter? And of course, we had this whole little narrative that we had rehearsed over the years that, well, they just weren't really surrendered. Well, they just had religion, they didn't have relationship, and so then then it begs the question, well, how can somebody spend a year with you and not be impacted by Jesus Christ if we're really living this thing? And so at some point you always have to go and look in the mirror and say, okay, what are we doing wrong here? What's going on? And so early on, my perception of success was much like, it was a straight line. You started at the bottom and you kind of went up. And I've come to find out that success looks a little bit differently. And if you can see the screen, it's like you learn some things, you make mistakes, you learn from the mistakes, you grow from them, you get counsel. And so the reality of success is really learning from our experiences. And I hope you would agree with that. Now, one of the key verses, I have several, but one of the things that really grabbed me early in my journey as a director is that it's from 1 John 3:16. It says, "This is how you know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters." And so there was this paradigm shift that I really felt the Lord was trying to take me through. And I really started to look at what was going on in our center. Okay, so do we really have a culture where I'm raising up sons? And maybe some of you are familiar with the scripture in Corinthians where Paul's talking and he says, you have 10,000 teachers but not many fathers. And here we are right now. We live in the largest fatherless generation in the history of the United States. And I believe that's created a leadership vacuum because of really you learn great leadership skills within the context of family. Some of the greatest lessons I've learned have been from my father. And so, you know, as we deal with these fatherless folks that come through our programs, that when they hear the word father, it doesn't bring warm feelings to their heart. You hear the word father, it actually brings, you know, some pretty powerful feelings of abandonment and maybe abuse, or maybe they've not had a father at all. And so here we're trying to paint this picture of a father, and many times I think we miss it because we get so up in doing our rules. And we try to teach that what's most important is following the rules. And I agree, we need to have a structure in our programs, absolutely, 100%. But I think the greater message is that is the message of love. And so as we started this journey, I don't know if you guys are familiar with photo radar, but out here in Arizona, Sheriff Joe Arpaio devised a great way to give out tickets. And what it is, it's a mechanical high-speed camera that they have throughout the highways, and they have some at intersections so they can catch people that run red lights, etc. But by and large, mostly what they have is these basically speed traps. And some of the people said, well, that's not constitutional. You have to warn people that there's a photo radar there. So they place signs prior to the photo radar. It's about a good 500 feet. And so I'm cruising along I-17 one day. It's one of the main highways here in Phoenix. And, you know, speeding. And I'm with a whole group of people that are speeding. And we see the photo radar sign, and you guess what we all do? We all slow down. And as soon as we get through the photo radar speed trap, and we know that we're, you know, out of the capture zone, we all sped back up. And as soon as that happened, the Holy Spirit spoke to me and said, that's what's going on in your program. And so you got guys that are able to slow down for a season, even follow some rules or whatever, but they're not having a change of heart. And so some of the other things that we had were frustrations with constant turnover, where we had a turnover of students, you know, and staff. You know, we were doing good if we could keep a staff person for 2 years. That was like a major accomplishment. And so, you know, when you don't have a very deep pool of staff, that also affects our programs. You know, if we don't have salty people that are sticking around and at our centers for more than a couple years, you know, people are trying to get a drink out of a shallow pond, so to speak. And some of the saltier people that I've had the privilege of having in my life have been people that have been born again for more than a couple years. So I really wanted to see that change at our center. I wanted to see us have staff retention. I wanted to see people sticking around. I wanted to see some changed lives. I really wanted to see discipleship take place. So the next slide here, it says, for the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation for all people, training us to renounce ungodliness and worldly passions and to live self-controlled lives. Upright and godly lives in this present age. That's from Titus 2:11. And so, you know, the grace of God teaching us to renounce ungodliness. And so, you know, how is that working out? You know, it wasn't working out very good for us. And, you know, like, I don't know about you, but maybe you have some of the same frustrations that I'm talking about. Well, then I really begin to think, you know, what is it that we're doing? You know, am I just managing people's sin? And the more I looked at it, the more that's really what was going on. And I've said this statement often, and it came to me, you know, many years ago when we first started this journey. We've been at this for about 7 years now. And discipleship is something that we do with people. It's not something we do to them. And a lot of what we call discipline was me punishing or hurting a student to make them change their behavior. And we had a problem with reaching people's hearts. We were more interested in the rules. Man, I'll tell you, my rule book, my program management book was probably a good 2 inches thick. I couldn't even remember all the rules. And I don't know about you, but maybe you could probably put names next to the rules. You know, we create a new rule because some student would invent a new way to cause us some frustrations. And so one of the things that kept coming up was pet peeve rules. You know, if you had a staff person that was really a neat Nick or whatever, he would want to create a new rule or a new policy. And you know, I'm the director, and so I come onto the center and I'm hanging out with the guys, and then I had my staff come up and tell me I was breaking the rules, you know, because I couldn't even remember all the rules. So I knew we had a problem. I knew that there was something wrong with our culture, and that somewhere we had moved from discipleship, or moved away from what I think the original intent is, to a place of high control. And so I always use this story when I'm teaching people about the grace-based program, is that we have dorm checks. Maybe some of you have that same thing where dorms have to be, you know, neat and clean, and then you have your chore guy or your chore Nazi or dorm Nazi, they call them. Students have some creative titles for some of our folks. And we had this checks where the guys had to go in and check the rooms, and to be honest with you, we were working harder than they were. So we have this rule with the trash can. You know, the trash cans have to be empty. And I had a staff guy that, you know, kept writing this room up because their trash can was not empty. Well, you know, I come into the room and there's this big uproar over a trash can. And there was a piece, and when I say a piece, I mean a piece of paper. It was a little piece of scripture card memorization that was in the trash can. And you know, the whole reason for the rule was so that the trash can would get emptied, not so it would be there for us to lay a burden on somebody else. And so I knew immediately that we had a problem. And one of the things that we really began to understand is that we had become so rules or sin focused that we'd moved away from what I believe is the real issue, is belief focus. Instead of asking the questions of what's going on in their heart, we were running around trying to control people's behavior. We had become behavior police, and which is very frustrating for anybody. And so then we saw where we had these two sets of behaviors. You know, we'd have guys.
That's slippery.
We'd have guys come in and they'd be worshiping in the chapel and lifting their hands and praising the Lord and doing all this awesome things, and then sometimes immediately they'd leave chapel and some of the most filthy language and just, you know, cussing and everything else, within moments of them just raising their hands and speaking in tongues and praising the Lord. And man, we have got an issue here. And of course, I had mentioned earlier about the relapse and the backsliding, however you want to, you know, verse that. Basically, we have guys, you know, do stellar in the program and then fail. consequently, on the opposite side of that stuff, some of the guys that we constantly had to spend all the time with, and that you would probably tag as rebellious, and those guys, from just from us spending time with them and building relationships with these guys, they would do better than the guys that went to the program and didn't break any of the rules. And so I started having an aha moment that the guys I'm spending time with are the guys that are making it, and the guys that are just doing program are not. And you know, again, I have mentioned student failure and staff retention. This was the one that was an eye-opener for me. Now, the law came in to increase the trespass, but where sin increased, grace abounded all the more. Now, at my center, when sin would increase, so would the rules. We'd have a new rule, you know, or the staff would do something awesome like make a new rule and not tell anybody. Your program manager would come in and make a policy shift, and we're going to do this, and you know, communication was not our highest you know, thing on the list of what we were good at. So a picture began to emerge. Now, some of the stuff that I'm sharing with you today, I'm trying to condense something that I usually take 3 to 4 hours to teach in about an hour. So you guys are just getting like a brief little snapshot. And so it's going to be hard for you. You're going to probably have more questions now after we get done, which is okay, than maybe questions that can blend into the landscape and blend into what they need to do to survive, but not necessarily transforming from the inside out. And then we had a low accountability. And see, I had control and accountability mixed up. I thought that if I was controlling people's behavior, I was holding them accountable. When in retrospect, what I was really doing was just trying to force people to do what I wanted them to do. And that cannot be our highest call in discipleship. You know, you don't find Jesus running around writing up his disciples every time. Control environment. We had low accountability, and somewhere I had mixed up high control as accountability instead of accountability actually being one another, holding each other to the standard of Christ's likeness. And what happened is we were producing chameleons. We were producing people that could do program but weren't necessarily changing from the inside out. They had a really good, you know, outside look, but inside they were not being transformed. There wasn't a lot of discipleship taking place, a lot of relationships, you know, taking place. And so there was a lot of pretending, a lot of acting, and so when the guys would fail or, you know, make mistakes or whatever, there was a lot of covering up. And so some of the things that we would see was we when we come into the classroom or the day room or, you know, one of the other areas or chap, whatever, as soon as we would come into the room, you would hear someone go 5-0 or, you know, man on floor or something like that, you know. And you know, when you start asking what that's about, I mean, you and I, you know, of course we knew what that was about. They were just trying to warn anybody in case they got caught. So we knew we had a very high control environment. And then there was a lot of blame shifting, minimizing, rationalizing, justifying, just a lot of isings of behavior. And so what we wanted to do, and so for some of you guys that have gone through ELP, you've probably read some of Jack Lanham's stuff, and he talks about the difference between a high control environment and a low control environment. And so we wanted to move away from us being behavior police and policing everybody's behavior. Instead, we wanted to really get into this place where we had access to their hearts. Now, I know many of you are absolutely familiar with the prodigal son story. And I find that story, it's like one of my favorites, but I find that the greatest tragedy of that story is the brother. I mean, here he had complete, unfettered access to the father, and yet he looked nothing like him. I mean, the prodigal went away, come back broken. The father wants to celebrate, but here's the guy who's been around his father, and so basically we could draw an analogy, being around the things of God and yet not having the heart of the father at all. And so that was really an indictment on us. When I began to really read that, some of the books that we read, the Jesus I Never Knew, things like that, I really found that us as a ministry had missed it. We were more concerned with program than we were with people, and so we decided to move away completely from this high control environment. And so what does that look like? What does it look like to have a low control environment? You know, when we would first present this to people, they would immediately think that, you know, you just got total chaos. And one really of establishing relationships first with the students and having access to their hearts, our whole culture changed. So, like, when I present this to people that are still in this high control environment type of thing, they the first questions that come to their mind, well, how do you do this or how do you do that? They want to drive back towards principles. And so if you guys can just maybe turn that side of your brain off for a minute and just kind of focus in on, okay, well, how can I better engage relationally with my students? What can I do that's going to lower the control factor and maybe teach them high accountability? So like at my center, the students wake themselves up, so I don't have to have a staff person running around making sure everybody's, you know, up at 6 o'clock. My students, they are supposed to be on time. They know they're supposed to be on time. So we're teaching them the value of responsibility versus me running around with a ticket or a write-up and say, hey, you know, you weren't here, here's a write-up. So we started to really gain access to some of the choices. What's going on in your heart that says that behavior is okay? So for us, it was a complete paradigm shift. We spent the first year and a half just practicing this just with the staff before I made any program changes. So we took almost a year just to learn how to do this within our own little staff family. So then what we started to see a change in is we saw the change from people, instead of acting and pretending, we started seeing, you know, actual, here's what's really going on in my heart. Here's what I'm really thinking. Because, I mean, you're all doing this thing called Teen Challenge, and I've learned that the greatest, or the worst message that many of our, you know, sons and daughters believe is that if you really knew me, if you really knew what was going on inside of me, if you really knew me, you'd neither love me nor accept me. And that's a powerful motivator to do that whole cover-up thing, the whole chameleon thing. And so then we started to learn from our failures. Instead of covering them up, we were starting to unpack some of the reasons, some of the choices that we made as staff. And then we started to see personal responsibility. We started to see staff and students alike starting to take personal responsibility for their own choices instead of playing the blame game. So the number one thing that we did in changing our culture is we started placing a higher priority on the relationships first. And so that meant really getting to know the students, you know, training phase here. And so taking it's just truth being transmitted through relationship. That's all it is. Let's see here. And then we started giving honor and trust. I'm currently reading this book by Kathy Truitt. We're placing higher priority on our relationships first, and then we would start to move towards principles, moving into discipleship and helping the student grasp some of the things that the Lord wanted them to grasp. And then the second thing was giving honor and trust. That was big. I can't overstate that. It was such a huge shift from people that have lost so much dignity, and to give them some honor and trust. And again, I'll pull from the prodigal son. When the father saw his son, the first thing he did was he gave him a robe, right? And he was restoring his identity, and then he gave him his ring and was restoring his authority, and then of course giving him the sandals and giving him purpose. And so one of the very first things that we try to do is build relationships and then give honor and trust to our students. And that comes with some challenges because people make mistakes. So then you have to learn how to allow people the freedom to fail and learn from those failures. And so, discipleship can be messy. And I'm sure you can agree. Not everybody fits in a little box. I have 2 kids. And the way that I deal with my oldest, I have a different relationship with her. I love both my kids, and I love them both awesomely, but the way I deal with correction with my older is totally different than the way I deal with correction with the younger. The younger is much more sensitive, and she's easier to talk to. The older one is more like her dad, very stubborn and hard-headed. And so I've learned just from my own family that not everybody responds to the same thing. And so we had to learn to be okay with that. And then we started asking heart-centered questions about their behavior. And what I've come to believe is that all behavior is purposeful. When you ask somebody why they do that and say, no, that's not an answer. There's an actual answer to that question. And so we started to ask, what their beliefs were. Instead of being behavior focused, we started coming back to being belief focused. So what is it that you believe that's okay? And then we moved away from using threats, punishment, carrot before the heart, carrot before the horse kind of thing, the cart and horse thing, where we got the carrot in front of the horse to make them do things, that kind of thing. We moved away from that and started to invite them to do discipleship with us. And that works, with work calls, with fundraising, with church services, with family days, we have learned it is just much more powerful to do it with. And to kind of give you guys a little we learned that we gave trust first. Again, talking about building that relationship, then we were engaging the students. And then that engagement brought ownership. And they began to take personal responsibility for their so it wasn't just Teen Challenge program they were doing. There was actual, hey, we are being discipled. And as we would go through this, and of course this is just a simple chart to kind of show the the value of it, but the motivation would grow for accountability. And ultimately you'd see results. You'd see where guys would come in and tell on themselves, where I'm not running around trying to catch things.
And then that brings up another interesting point. Instead of us trying to catch people doing something wrong, I started to try to catch them doing things right and reinforcing that. And so we still have a very, very high disciplined environment. We still have a very structured environment. We just accomplish it in a little different way. So my philosophy at our center in really Arizona is choice, challenge, change. And, we call it seeing your way to better life choices. And so teaching these folks that are in our program, our sons and our daughters, how to make better choices, I found more value in that. And so we give students and staff the power to make choices and to learn from the good and the bad situations. And then we challenge. The students and staff and choices. Unchristlike behavior is challenged, but then also victories are celebrated. And strongholds, we've learned how to tear down strongholds. And because our environment has changed, because our culture has changed, and we have this culture of accountability, we're talking about things that we need to run, and then we start to see change. And then that personal responsibility component, man, I just cannot tell you how that has changed our culture, where we're not trying to get people to do what we want them to do. They're actually taking ownership of their own program. And that was just transformational for us. And so the second point is that we believe grace. We believe that grace, the grace of God. And so I wanted to spend a minute on that real quick. Now, Jesus in John chapter 1 verse 17 said that grace and truth were realized through Jesus Christ. And so when you look at Jesus, a lot of times when you say grace, people immediately think that it means the great cover-up. And that's not what I'm talking about. So like Jesus said, you heard it said that thou shalt not commit murder, but I tell you the truth, if anyone has hate in their heart, he's going to do murder. And so Jesus raised the bar. Grace is a much higher standard than the law. And so we really teach and believe. So Jesus said, thou shalt not commit adultery, right? Quoting the law. And then he goes on to say, if you even think about it, you're doing it. So grace is a much higher standard than just the law. And so that's where we keep pointing our students and our staff back to Jesus, because people aren't looking for Moses. They're looking for the Lord. They're looking for Jesus. So we really believe that grace means empowerment. It means overcoming. The first slide, it means that the grace of God has taught us to renounce ungodliness. So we believe that. And then truth. Now, truth spoken in love is very powerful, and you have to have truth. You have to have the truth at all, and truth or legalism. And it's been my experience for the last 15 years that Teen Challenge struggles more with the legalism piece than the latter. So you have to have truth.
Eric, we lost your sound again. You're actually offline now. You're back?
Is it back again?
Yes.
Okay, where'd y'all lose me at, or do we have a few more minutes, or?
A few more minutes, about 10 more minutes, and you were talking about truth and grace.
Okay, got it. So, I apologize. It must be because I'm all the way out here in Arizona. So, I'll just kind of reiterate. So we found that grace was a higher standard than the law. And then truth had to be married with grace. So we had truth without grace is just legalism, and grace without truth is license. And so we've found that you have to have this tension between grace and truth. It has to happen. And then time. We need the time to process some of these things. It takes some folks some time to get through some of these things that they've been through. And so I think Teen Challenge is awesome at giving time for people to process it. I think that's an awesome, one of the greatest strengths of Teen Challenge. And so then the 4 pillars of our program is Christ-likeness is the standard. So not the staff, not the rule book or the structure manual, but Jesus Christ is the standard. And so that puts everything on the table to talk about. And, you know, before we made this shift, we had so many rules, and some of those rules that would get you kicked out of the program. I had some 40-something rules, you know, and some of the things that the guys were struggling with, they weren't even on the table to talk about. And so when we moved away to this relational program, that it put everything on the table for us to talk about. So Christ-likeness is the standard, and then number 2 is identity, and you guys heard me talk about the prodigal son and how identity, giving our students and our staff identity first is so important. It's giving that trust, giving that honor, you know, and creating a culture of honor that really fosters reciprocation in that from them, not just us to them, but them to us as well. Then complete accountability, and so staff and student alike are held accountable. And so there's nobody, and you've heard, I'm sure you guys have heard this, you know, why should I do that? Well, because I'm staff. Yeah, that really works awesome. So complete accountability for all of us. And then self-evaluation. And I don't have a self-evaluation form. Maybe I can find one real quick for you guys and show you what it looks like. I don't think I have one. Let's see. You know, I don't think I have one. Well, that's pretty much all I have. If I had a self-evaluation form, I'd show it to you. But basically, you know, when we're holding guys accountable, the first question on the form is, what did I choose to do? So we try to remove the whole blame game from the outset. And the second question is, well, what were the results of my choices? Again, we're talking about personal responsibility. And number 3 is, how did this affect my environment? So how did it affect me? How did it affect others? And then number 4, what is the Lord showing me in this situation? And then the question number 5 is, what is my plan to change? And so we're constantly bringing it back to, you know, personal responsibility, you know, taking responsibility for one's own behavior. Then we're talking about, you know, how did this affect other people, cause and effect relationships. And then, okay, so now that we've pinned down what's going on, what is our plan to change? And so sometimes the students will have to sit down with the staff or me or one of the other guys and put our best thinking on and say, okay, well, what's a practical way that I can overcome this this behavior? So that's one of the things. Like maybe a great example would be with the cigarettes and smoking or whatever. You know, if you don't take care of the belief behind why someone smokes, they're going to smoke. And so when a guy does an evaluation on smoking, we will eventually we'll get to the belief. The belief is, I feel I need this to relax or deal with stress, or because I wanted to have it, whatever. So we will help them unpack the belief behind it. And then once we've dealt with the lie behind that behavior, we start to see change in that. And then we've had a lot of success with that. Well, sorry for all the technical difficulties. I hope you guys got a little bit out of this. Again, I tried to condense, you know, 2 sessions from the national conference into one little session to hopefully give you guys a little picture. But I just want to encourage you that our students are looking for fathers. They're looking for not just mentors. They're looking for people to invest in their life. And a lot of times you think they don't because they're pushing you off. And that's usually they're the ones that need it the most. And so if you take away anything from today, is that the relationships that we have with our students are gold, and that's what they're really looking for. Well, thanks for allowing me to share with you guys today. And man, I count it an honor and a privilege to just be a part of the ELP. And man, I enjoyed my time with Carissa and Andrew tremendously. It's been great to get to know a lot of you out there, and I'm going to have to find some more excuses to come out and visit y'all. So yeah, thanks for letting me hang out with you guys today.
There we go. Thanks.